Hello and welcome back to the MMA Girl podcast. We are on episode 22 today on the MMA Girl podcast. I'm your host, Jess, of course, MMA Girl. I hope you're all doing well. Welcome back to my podcast. Welcome back to my MMA space. Today we're going over all the latest fight rumors, all the latest fight news, going through all the good bits, the bad bits, the bonuses, the crazy stuff. So let's get into it. I'm going to go straight in with a bit of bad news. Of course, Shavkat Rakhmonov's family were struck with a disaster recently where Shavkat's wife and child were involved in a car accident. They were luckily only injured, but unfortunately, two of the passengers in the car were unfortunately deceased on the scene. So Shavkat, we saw him walk out at UFC's Abu Dhabi event with Magamedov, and just after the fight concluded, we heard, of course, news that back in Kazakhstan, his wife was involved in this accident. So wishing all the best to his wife and his children, and of course to the people who have lost those people in the accident. So very sad news. So I want to get over that quickly, but it has to be said because it's quite important to support people in the MMA community, whether it's good news or bad news. That's what happened to Shavkat's family, and I hope them all the best. Now, we have some news from Jiri Prochazka. Recently, he disclosed that he would be the backup fighter, officially the backup fighter, for the fight that's happening on October 4th between Ankalaev and, of course, Alex Pereira. And, of course, that's the main event of UFC's 320 card on October 4th at the T-Mobile Arena. Now, what's happening in this fight card, of course, we're having Ankalaev versus Alex Pereira in the main event for the light heavyweight belt. And then we're having, of course, Corey Sandhagen taking on the bantamweight champion Magamedov. And of course, in that event, we have Jiri Prochazka taking on Khalil Roundtree Jr. And apparently they've asked Jiri Prochazka to be the backup fighter for Ankalaev versus Alex Pereira. So not sure how that's going to work, whether or not maybe before the fight, if one of the guys pulls out of the title fight, Jiri will be asked to step up and take on the vacant place in the main event, or they may find another solution because, of course, he's got a fight scheduled on that same night. If he fights Khalil Roundtree, whether he wins or loses, and then someone pulls out of the fight, it may be a bit difficult, depending on his physical state, for him to fight a second time in the same night. So I'm not sure if that's going to happen that way. But I think up until fight night, there's a possibility that Jiri might have to step up if one of the two guys injures themselves. But Alex Pereira and Ankalaev don't have track records of getting injured or putting out fights beforehand, so hopefully that won't happen. But of course, as you know, in MMA, I know obviously the UFC do this, but maybe other promotions do that as well. For a title fight, you must be bang on your weight. You cannot be a pound over or a pound under. You have to be on weight, unless there's some stipulation that says you don't have to be, but most of the time you have to be on weight exactly to the letter, because of course if you aren't on weight, then because it's a title fight, you will be stripped of your belt if, for example, Ankalaev isn't bang on his weight. And if Alex Pereira is not on weight for the title fight, he can still fight Ankalaev, but that will no longer be for the belt, and that would be useless. So hopefully both guys will make weight, and then they won't need to use Jiri Prochazka to replace one of them that doesn't make weight, of course. On other news, we have Dan Hooker, of course, still calling out a lot of fighters, as I spoke to you guys about last week. He called out, of course, Arman and most notably Charles Oliveira. This week, he's been a bit cheeky online, actually. He's been provoking both fighters, insulting Charles's methods for his cutting. Of course, everyone knows Charles Oliveira has a cutting ceremony that he even allowed some fans to take part in at some point. And he's surrounded by his whole team. He's surrounded by all his friends and family who help him get through the weight cut to get to lightweight. Now, a lot would argue that if you have to go through all of that just to make weight, then maybe it's just not the weight class you should be in. But that's another subject, of course, entirely. But he was, of course, Dan Hooker, insulting Charles Oliveira about this ceremonial weight cut that he does. And I think he's just trying to provoke people and eventually cause the UFC to book a fight for him, because we've seen a lot of things in the past happen in that way. When two fighters get it on social media, then we do eventually see their fight coming up because it's a good storyline and it sells tickets. So that would be logic. So that would be logic that the UFC choose to put Dan Hooker against either Arman or Charles Oliveira. And I'm quite happy because Arman Tsarukyan, again, is being left on the sidelines by Dustin Poirier. And even Paddy Pimblett recently came out saying, I'm not interested in a fight against Arman. He's boring and he doesn't deserve a fight. He's a silly sausage, as he would say, Paddy Pimblett. Now, I love how Dan Hooker is obviously calling out anyone he wants to call out, because I feel like that's the spirit of the UFC. That's the spirit of Dan Hooker in general. So Dan Hooker would fight Arman Tsarukyan, no problem at all, if Ilia Topuria and Paddy Pimblett don't want to. But there are other people in the lightweight division, in the top 5, in the top 10, that should be considered for fights against Paddy, Arman, Dan, etc., and not overlooked just because they're not in the title picture or in the title conflicts. Sean O'Malley, former champion Sean O'Malley, he has apparently been hinting at a possible leave from the UFC in order to go and pursue other things in other promotions, because he doesn't see many opportunities for him in the UFC, and he sees no future in the UFC now that Merab is, of course, champion. Kairi Sandhagen, of course, as I spoke to you earlier about, is going to be the next title contender against Merab, and after that we have Petr Yan, who is obviously going to get a title shot against the winner of that fight. Sean's had his title fight, he's had his rematch, he's lost his belt, and he needs to just get another fight in. I don't know why he's saying he sees no future for himself in the UFC, because a lot of fighters like Merab, for example, who conquer their weight classes, they often move up. They often change weight classes. They often go and see other things. And Merab is not invincible. No person is invincible. But if Merab is the Achilles heel of the bantamweight division and no one can get past him, then we may be seeing a double champ in Merab Dvalishvili, and he may be going up to featherweight at some point. And I would definitely love to see him at featherweight. I'm not really sure why Sean is being so negative. These are rumours, of course, so maybe him hinting at leaving the UFC is just a way to say, hey, UFC, I want to fight. I want to see where this goes, because I don't want to lose the rhythm of fighting, even though I lost my rematch against Merab. So both guys, of course, at bantamweight, they may be, people at bantamweight may be saying to themselves, this category, this weight class is blocked by Merab Dvalishvili, but Merab will probably move up to featherweight. So Sean O'Malley, stay at bantamweight, and you'll see how it goes, and don't lose hope. He may be able to move up to featherweight, as his coach was saying, Tim Welch was saying, he may move up to featherweight, and that could be a good possibility for him as well. He mustn't lose interest in the UFC just because he doesn't see any future for him at bantamweight, because I think there's a lot of things he can be doing at the UFC that he's not doing right now. Hopefully he'll get a fight very soon. Next up, we have Reina de Ryder. Reina de Ryder, of course, he's moved up to 5th place in the middleweight division. Of course, Robert Whittaker, unfortunately, after his loss at UFC Abu Dhabi to Reina de Ryder, is now 7th in the UFC middleweight division. But Reina de Ryder, of course, sparked quite a bit of controversy after his win against the former champion, Robert Whittaker, because it was a tight one. Even as I said to you guys 2 weeks ago, I was quite upset that Robert didn't win, because I felt like he'd done enough to win that fight. Of course, looking at the stats, you could say otherwise. However, Reina de Ryder came out the winner of that fight, and there was nothing we can do about it. However, Paulo Costa, of course, had something to say about Reina de Ryder's victory. He was poking fun at Reina de Ryder, and of course, that's what Paulo Costa's about. He likes to poke fun at people. He likes to provoke people on the internet, and I think it's a great technique, because Paulo is not a high-ranked middleweight right now, and he needs to get high-ranked opponents in order to move up back in the rankings. So if he can get a win over Reina de Ryder, for example, he'd move to 5th place and be able to start his arguments for having a title shot one day against the next champion, either Chimaev or Du Plessis. So maybe this could be a nice fight. And Reina de Ryder has responded to Paulo Costa saying, you came back, you hadn't won in 3 years, and you came back with a win. That doesn't mean you are at my level. But if you want to test that, we can see each other in the octagon on November 11th at MSG for UFC 323, and we'll see how that will go down between us in the octagon. He's manifesting his own fight, and that's a really good technique when you're not high ranked but you want high ranked opponents, because now high ranked opponents want you. And of course he was talking about his disagreement with Chimaev, and that could be also a situation that could develop into a fight one day. And Paulo Costa's just got the gift of the gab, as you say it, and the gift of the Twitter gab that creates storylines that make him a star in the UFC that will always be worthy of a bit more money, a bit more star power, even though he isn't a high-ranked middleweight currently. So I'd like to see Reina de Ryder take on Paulo Costa. That way Paulo Costa will be able to show him the skills that he believes he has over Reina de Ryder. Now, recently, of course, we saw Dustin Poirier at UFC 318 make his final walkout to the octagon and face Max Holloway for the BMF belt, and unfortunately lose via unanimous decision. But what a beautiful fight it was. What a beautiful send-off it was for Dustin Poirier. Now, we are hearing news that Dustin Poirier will be joining the commentary team at ESPN and start his job as a UFC MMA analyst from now onwards. We don't know when he's going to be starting that gig, but this was an eventuality we knew was coming because we'd seen him do shows from here and there on ESPN for UFC, and now they are confirming that he will be starting his new job, and he has confirmed that he'll be focusing all his efforts onto his new gig at ESPN. Now, I don't know how this will work because, of course, ESPN's contract with the UFC is up, so they're on the last leg of their TV deal with the UFC. So how is that going to work from now onwards? Will Dustin Poirier move to the other network that take on the UFC to do his analyst job there? Does that mean that everyone that's worked for ESPN and works for ESPN currently that also work for the UFC are going to be moving over to the new channel where they're going to be doing the UFC? Is the new network going to take on a analyst show accompanying the UFC pay-per-views? That's a question that I have, because I love the idea, of course, that UFC take on former fighters to become analysts and commentators, as Daniel Cormier has, as Paul Felder has, Dominic Cruz, and of course on the ESPN side of things we have Dustin Poirier coming in, we have DC and Chael Sonnen with their ESPN exclusive show, and we have Anthony Smith, who is a current analyst, weekly analyst for ESPN on the MMA side of things. So will all of these guys stay at ESPN despite ESPN no longer being the network for the UFC, or will the UFC take everyone from ESPN with them to their new network? That's something I'd love to know. But at least we're hearing news that Dustin Poirier is going to be staying in MMA in this new capacity, and I love seeing that. Sean Brady, not sure if you guys know, but Sean Brady and Joe Pyfer are teammates and best friends. They have a great podcast that they do together often. And Sean Brady recently has said that he is no longer willing to wait to get another fight. He wants a fight, and he has been arguing his case apparently to the UFC matchmakers. A couple of months ago, after his win at UFC London over Leon Edwards in the main event, he had said he was willing to wait. He was not impatient. And I was really happily surprised to see someone like Sean Brady saying, I don't mind if another title shot happens before me. I'm number one contender, but I can take on Ian Gary, for example, and that's not a problem to me. But as number one contender, Sean Brady could wait it out to see who will win between Jack Deda and Islam Makhachev. But he wants to get a fight in this year before he gets his title shot, and he wants a real true number one contenders fight between himself and Shavkat at MSG on the same night that we are rumored to be getting Islam Makhachev versus JDM, the welterweight champion. So that could be something that they'll usually will work out with him, and I hope they do, because Sean Brady's hungry. He's looking to get back into the octagon, and despite having a slugfest of a fight against Leon Edwards, he was dominant. He controlled the whole fight, so I don't think he took much damage at all. So Sean Brady, very dangerous. He says that's a true number one contenders fight when talking about his fight against Shavkat and a potential matchup at MSG in November on the 11th. So I hope Sean Brady gets his fight. That's something that the UFC should look into, because that's a real good fight to make. So in the middleweight picture, Israel Adesanya has expressed his wishes at the end of his career to only face people he has already faced, probably not exclusively until the end of his career, but at least for now, he's looking for a rematch against someone he's already fought. So he has already, of course, fought a lot of people, but he is speaking specifically about Sean Strickland or Paulo Costa. Paulo Costa being someone who is very much a key member of the UFC's middleweight division, even though he's been absent and a bit on the sidelines for quite some time. And I'd love to see a rematch between Paulo Costa and Israel Adesanya, or Sean Strickland versus Israel, because there's a lot of history between both those guys. So those are quite interesting fights. As we know, of course, Sean Strickland is currently banned indefinitely. We don't know when his ban will be lifted, but when he gets back from his ban, he may be put in a fight against Israel Adesanya. And I know the fans would love to see that happen again. And they'd definitely love to see the press conference for that UFC fight card. Chimaev, speaking of middleweights, of course, in less than 2 weeks, we are seeing UFC 319 happening in Chicago, Illinois. And we are having, of course, DDP, Dricus du Plessis, taking on Khamzat Chimaev for the UFC middleweight belt. Of course, current champion DDP is working hard in South Africa to train for his fight against Chimaev. And Chimaev, likewise, is working very, very hard. He's obviously training alongside Arman Tsarukyan and more recently also Aaron Pico, because, of course, for the co-main event of UFC 319, as we talked about last week, we're getting Aaron Pico versus Leron Murphy. Now, a lot of people are saying that Chimaev's cardio was his main Achilles heel, was his main issue. And we do see in some of his fights that go the distance that people like Gilbert Burns, people like Kamaru Usman had problems with Chimaev in the first and second rounds. But going towards the second, halfway through the second, towards the third round, and in the third round, Chimaev, of course, lost a lot of his cardio, became quite tired, and showed signs that the wear and tear was taking its toll out on him. Now, apparently, the new version of Chimaev that we're going to be seeing in less than 2 weeks at UFC 319 is not the same. And he's obviously trained to go into those championship rounds because, of course, he's not used to any 5-round fights. And championship rounds are always the most difficult rounds for both opponents in the octagon. So whether or not this fight goes to distance, because a lot of people are saying if Chimaev gets on top of Dricus du Plessis, this fight could be over in the first or the second round. So if it is over in the first or second round, then we won't know what Chimaev's like in the championship rounds or over the third round. But I really think this fight will go the distance, and not because it won't end in a finish. I think this fight will end in a finish, but I believe that we won't be seeing it end in the first or second round. This is someone, we're talking about Dricus du Plessis, who has submitted so many people in his career, and outside of his career, just in training, he's been put up against people that are jiu-jitsu champions, that are wrestling champions, and he has submitted everyone. He has never been submitted by someone in training, nor in, of course, competition in the UFC. So I'm really excited to see what this matchup will be like. And maybe both guys, being huge grapplers, may stay a bit more on the feet than we expect. But if we know Khamzat, he'll take him down once the boxing's done its job, or once the boxing's become too much. But he is, of course, training very hard. He's been doing a lot of workouts to enable his cardio to improve enormously, according to everyone over at the Jackson podcast. And he is training over there with Arman Tsarukyan, who is, of course, a signed Jackson athlete. And apparently he is looking very dangerous. But according to Arman Tsarukyan, he says that Chimaev is never 100% on the day of his fight because he overtrains all the time systematically for his fights. So what I'm worried about with Chimaev is that maybe he has overtrained, and we may be seeing a Chimaev that is just tired because he's overtrained over the course of his camp. Now, he hasn't just got, of course, the camp, he's got the cut at the end. So I really hope that nothing comes into play in terms of his health, or not making weight, or just being too tired to give his all in his fight against Dricus. What do you guys think of Dricus versus Chimaev? I'd love to know your guys' opinion on this fight. Do you think Dricus du Plessis will win hands down over Chimaev? Or are you team Chimaev and think that Dricus will be flatlined by Chimaev or get submitted by Chimaev in the first or second round? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to know your opinion. Now, let's move on to boxing, because as I spoke to you guys last week, Usyk has just up to the 23rd of August to confirm that he will take on Joseph Parker for the undisputed heavyweight title, because, of course, Joseph Parker is the current interim heavyweight champion, and he needs to take on, of course, the current champion, Usyk, to unify the belts. And the WBO has ordered Usyk to do so. And apparently, according to recent reports, he has yet to enter into negotiations to find a date, a location, etc., for the fight, and he's not yet at all entered in negotiations with Joseph Parker's team to set up a fight. Now, does this mean that Usyk is going to be pulling out and relinquishing his belt once again, or does this mean that he is contemplating on whether or not to do it because he may be looking for a bigger money fight? Of course, Joseph Parker is a big name in heavyweight boxing, but he's not the biggest name that Usyk has already faced, and maybe he wants to complete some of his trilogies with Anthony Joshua or Tyson Fury before engaging himself in a fight to unify the belts. Because I think with boxers like this, they're not looking to be the undisputed champion just because it's, you have to be the undisputed champion. You can earn a lot of money without being the champion of any boxing category, any weight class. So I think he's mostly looking for money fights. He's 38 years old. He's not looking to continue his title reign as if he was 27 and he wanted to be champion for the next 10 years. He's already been past that. He's already done the Olympics. He's already done all this. So maybe he's looking now to do exhibition fights, big money fights, and fights that will be, for his legacy, more important. That's what I kind of feel like he's trying to get at, because by not negotiating with Joseph Parker's team, he's basically showing that Joseph Parker isn't as big of a name for him as he would have liked his next opponent to be, I think. So on the boxing front, we'll stay on that one, because Jake Paul has apparently entered into negotiations with Anthony Joshua's team. They're looking for a date and location. They're very much in serious negotiations for a fight with Jake Paul. So this is actually going to happen, guys. I mean, I didn't think this would happen. I thought it was ridiculous. Even just seeing Jake Paul get in the ring with Usyk and face off Usyk, I just thought to myself, how is that even going to work? Why would we even contemplate a matchup like that? But apparently negotiations were in place for him to take on Anthony Joshua. So he wasn't lying when he said that Anthony Joshua would be his next opponent, because that is exactly what he's trying to get done. So I'll keep you guys posted. We may be hearing from Jake Paul and Anthony Joshua in the next big main event in boxing. So that could happen anytime soon. Who knows? So this is a segment where we talk about the latest fight news for each fight card that's going to be coming up in the next couple of months. So these are the confirmed fights that are coming up very soon. I will be present at UFC Paris on the 6th of September. We will be seeing, of course, in the main event, Imavov versus Caio Borralho from the Fighting Nerds, Imavov being Nassourdine Imavov, #1 contender of the UFC's middleweight division, and obviously from Paris himself. He's originally from Dagestan, of course, but he came over to Paris very young and started his MMA career and training over there. Now we have, of course, the main event, a Fighting Nerd versus a Parisian, but we also have in the co-main event a Fighting Nerd versus a Parisian as well. We have Mauricio Ruffy from the Fighting Nerds taking on Benoit Denis, and this is going to be a banger fight. This is going to be a banger card, and so much is at stake for both these fights, because, of course, Chimaev and DDP is happening next week. We then have, of course, after this, we have Imavov versus Caio Borralho for the #1 contender spot for a fight against the champion. We have, of course, then Ruffy and BSD having it on in the co-main event, which probably sets the tone for the main event. So if BSD unfortunately loses his fight on the 6th of September against Ruffy, then Nassourdine has a much bigger role to play when coming out and doing his walkout in Paris, because he has the whole of the city of Paris behind him, and he has to perform and he has to win against Caio Borralho, even more so if BSD loses. Mauricio Ruffy is a really tough cookie, and I'm scared for BSD and scared for the French people that are rooting for Benoit. Maybe now that he's coming up against a former top 10 fighter in the lightweight division in Benoit Denis, this may be a different level for Ruffy, and this may not be the same ballpark, but it could be completely easy for him, and he could just win with a flying back kick like he did with Bobby Green. But I'm not sure that the level is the same. So we'll be seeing whether BSD has what it takes to fight and win against Mr. Mauricio Ruffy at UFC Paris on the 6th of September. UFC Perth has been announced for September the 28th. Then we're getting, as we did announce a couple of weeks ago, Carlos Ulberg taking on, of course, the comeback kid Dominic Reyes on a 3-fight win streak, 3 consecutive KOs in his career since he came back from his hiatus. Now he's taking on a Carlos Ulberg who has a much longer winning streak, of course, but it's going to be exciting. I cannot wait to see this fight. And on this card, we've had 3 fights that have been added to it for now. Of course, there will be more fights added to it as we go along. We have Jimmy Crute versus Arslan, and we have Junior Tafa coming back off of his loss to Tukhugov a couple of weeks ago. He's coming back after his loss to take on Arslan, a Turkish fighter who is on a 2-fight losing streak. So both Junior Tafa and Arslan need a win in this fight. So this will be a real nice one, because I think when it comes to fighters being cut, you may get cut or you may not. That depends on your position in the company, that depends on your popularity. So Junior Tafa may be an example of someone who's popular with the fans that we're not cutting, but he is essential on a card that is happening in his continent, of course. Being from New Zealand, having this card in Perth in Australia, we needed at least one Tafa on the card. So we got Junior Tafa staying, of course, at light heavyweight against Aslan, who's looking, of course, to win in order to keep his contract at the UFC. So this could be a banger. We also have Nolan versus Elder, lightweight division fight, another fight that's going to be a banger, another fight that's been added to UFC Perth's card that will make this card real cool. Not sure on the order, of course, of these fights yet because we haven't had the full card come out, but we are getting at least these 4 fights for sure at UFC Perth, unless there's someone who pulls out or gets injured, of course. So we'll be looking out, of course, for the 28th of September this year at UFC Perth. And I'm very excited that UFC are coming back to Australia for not just a numbered card, but for a nice fight night with some recognisable faces from New Zealand and Australia that we love to see come back. Jimmy Crute coming back off an amazing submission win. I can't wait to see these guys come back. Carlos Ulberg, who won just a few months ago in London, in the UFC London card in March. I mean, this is going to be crazy. Dominic Reyes, I hope for Dominic that he gets a win here, because I'd like him to finish his story, you know, come back for good and look good in the octagon as he takes on someone in Carlos Ulberg who is very dangerous in the octagon. So I think it's a great matchup, and it's a really intriguing matchup because we want to see who out of these two guys could win this fight. So I'm very excited. So following UFC Perth, of course, we have on October 4th, UFC 320 headlining, as I said earlier. We have Alex Pereira and Ankalaev, Merab Dvalishvili, Corey Sanhagen, and of course Jiri Prochazka versus Khalil Rountree Jr. Now, added to this card, we have Abu Magamedov, who will be taking on Joe Pyfer. As Joe Pyfer said on his social media, he wants the smoke from Abu Magamedov. So I think this is going to be a great fight at middleweight. I can't wait to see these two get in the octagon and see what will happen between the two of them. We also have Kevin Holland, who has hinted that he will be on the card. As we've seen Kevin Holland, of course, get beaten down by D-Rod in their 3-round decision fight where he lost to D-Rod. He initially had said after his fight against D-Rod that he wanted to come back in September, then come back just before Thanksgiving, and then come back just before Christmas. I thought that was going to be a little tight, and as I said in my podcast before UFC 318, he's biting a bit too much off than he can chew, because asking for that many fights in 1 year just to break the record may not be good for his health, and exactly that has happened, I think, because coming back on October was not what was planned, because coming back on October means he could come back in December, but that would make 6 fights in 1 year and not 7 as he'd originally planned. But 6 fights in 1 year is insane still, and Kevin could be happy with already 4 fights in 1 year. Most fighters don't get that. The UFC like to use him, so he tweeted out October 4th, Viva Las Vegas. So I know what that means. He's probably got a contract on the table. He's probably got an opponent that's been offered to him. So we may be seeing Kevin Holland on the UFC 320 card October 4th. And probably then, if he loses his fight, he may not fight again in 2025 and just be happy with 5 fights in 1 year. Or if he wins his fight, easily or not, he may come back in December for his 6th fight in 1 year. A record breaker. I think there was a statistic that said Weili Zhang and Kevin Holland debuted on the same day, on the same pay-per-view card. And between the two of them, Kevin Holland has had 27 fights since he debuted in the UFC, and Weili Zhang has only had 12 fights. And Weili Zhang, she's currently the strawweight champion, but she hasn't had as many fights as Kevin Holland by a long shot. She has had less than half of the amount of fights Kevin Holland has had in his UFC tenure. So he can be proud of that, and he can be proud of that stat compared to Weili Zhang. Now, going over to PFL before we go into the fight rumours, PFL Dubai is also happening on the 4th of October, so I'm not sure how everyone's going to be able to watch that, but we have Khabib, who has confirmed also that Paul Hughes will be coming back to rematch Umar Nurmagomedov for their lightweight title, and of course, this is a real banger of a fight that will happen. We got a nice 5-round decision fight from Paul Hughes and the champion Umar Nurmagomedov, and this time around the current champion Umar is looking to come back into the octagon, and the rematch was inevitable between himself and Paul Hughes. So I'm happy that Paul Hughes is once again getting a fight for the title, and he's getting his rematch that he wanted against Umar. Now, there is also a return of someone who we've not seen in quite a long time, Artem Lobov. Artem Lobov was previously one of Conor McGregor's training partners, and he'll be coming back at PFL to take back the throne, apparently. Word for word, they said Artem has returned to claim his throne. So he'll be taking on Tukhugov in a 3-round bout at the PFL Dubai's event. So not to miss that either on October 4th. They'll probably be doing October 3rd or October 4th. We don't know if it's going to be a Friday or a Saturday yet, but I think it's going to be a Friday so that they don't mix up with October 4th, which is obviously UFC 320. If they want fight fans to watch and book tickets for this event, they're going to need to put it on October 3rd. But it'll be around the same time as UFC 320, so that's to watch out for and not to miss. Now, for the fight rumours, this is a little fight rumours segment. These are all the rumours, of course, not set in stones. Of course, these are to be taken with a pinch of salt. We may be getting Josh Emmett versus Patricio Pitbull, Josh Emmett being 11th ranked in the featherweight division and Patricio Pitbull getting into the top 15 at 13. Now, this is apparently rumoured to be for UFC Rio happening on October 11th. Of course, Brazil, we've not been to Brazil in quite a few years with the UFC. So, UFC Rio is happening. It will be a fight night, and we may be getting Patricio Pitbull facing Josh Emmett. For now, that's what we've heard for October 11th this year. So October is going to be filled with banger cards. I cannot wait. Now, Ryan Spann versus Walter Walker is in the works also for this card. So I think we're getting a lot of Brazilians coming in for this card. Would love to see both the Walker brothers on this card. That would be nice. But Walter Walker has accepted a fight against Ryan Spann. So we're waiting for that to be officially announced as soon as possible. But the biggest rumor is, of course, Josh Emmett versus Patricio Pitbull on the main event card. Khabib has also confirmed that JDM versus Islam is happening at MSG, as I said earlier on this podcast. He was at a seminar in Russia, and he was talking about the future events for his training partners. And he said Umar was, of course, facing Paul Hughes on October 4th, and that JDM versus Islam is happening in MSG on November the 11th. So insane announcements from Khabib. That would be an amazing fight for a title fight in the main event at Madison Square Garden in New York. That would be incredible. This is why a lot of fighters would love to fight at MSG and are looking to get on this card. So with a headliner like that, I don't blame them. Also for the MSG card, we are getting Jim Miller versus Matt Favola. Potentially, this is a targeted fight for the MSG fight card in November on the 11th. Jim Miller versus Matt Favola. Matt Favola, we saw him taking a knockout against Fares Ziem at UFC Paris last year. And just beforehand, he'd taken a knockout out from Benoit the year before. So UFC Paris has not treated Matt Favola very well. But we're going to see Matt Favola come back from his medically issued hiatus and hopefully get a win over Jim Miller, or add to Jim Miller's long list of fighters that he has fought over the years and won over. What do you think of all the fight rumours and fight news that I just told you guys? Let me know in the comments down below. Like, comment, subscribe as usual. Thank you for your support. And I will be back at the end of the week for a breakdown of this weekend's fight night between Delize versus Hernandez. See you guys later. Bye.